Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're taking a really fascinating and, let's be honest, pretty radical trip back in time.
We are, right back to 1949.
Exactly. A moment when the whole global power structure was just being, well, violently reshaped after World War II.
A real pivot point in history.
And our source material for this deep dive gives us this incredibly clear, though you have to say extremely partisan view of that moment.
It's from William Z. Foster, excerpts from his major work, The Twilight of World Capitalism.
Right. And Foster was a big name in the American communist movement back then.
A very significant figure. And this isn't just, opinion. He's using a specific analytical lens here.
Which is?
It's historical materialism, the Marxist view.
Okay. Explain that a bit for maybe listeners who aren't familiar.
Sure. Basically, it's the idea that history at its core is driven by economics, by the means of production and the inevitable struggle between social classes that arises from it.
So Foster's looking at the world in 49 through that lens.
Precisely. And his conclusion is stark. He's arguing that world capitalism has definitively, past its peak. It's entered a stage of, irreversible decay.
That's a huge claim. And he contrasts this decaying capitalism with something else.
He does. He argues this epochal change is actually happening right then. You've got this declining capitalist sector, which he says is being led or maybe even exploited by a U.S. he calls, cannibalistic.
Cannibalistic, wow.
Strong word. And on the other side, the rising socialist world led by the Soviet Union.
So our mission today is to walk you through this analysis. We're going to be impartial guides here.
Absolutely. We're not endorsing the view, just explaining it.
We want you to quickly get the core arguments. We'll unpack Foster's evidence for this supposed capitalist decay, the symptoms he saw.
And we'll look hard at his assessment of American imperialism specifically. Understand why he saw strength in the socialist bloc.
Plus, his critique of other systems, like social democracy and even religion. It's basically a blueprint for revolution written right at the start of the Cold War.
It really is. A product of its time, but a fascinating one.
Okay, it sounds like a lot to cover. Let's start at the beginning. Where does Foster actually place capitalism in the grand scheme of history? And when did this supposed rot really set in?
Well, he starts quite carefully, actually. He gives capitalism its due, historically speaking.
How so?
He acknowledges that even with what he calls its dark and bloody history over 400 years, capitalism was a step forward for humanity.
A necessary step.
A necessary step, yes. It broke free from semi-feudal systems, unleashed productive forces, things unimaginable before.
But he doesn't dwell on the positives for long, I take it.
Not at all. He immediately pivots to the brutality of its establishment. He uses the U.S. as a prime example.
The American Revolution.
He sees it as a multi-stage capitalist revolution, actually. 3 phases, all violent.
Yeah, what are they?
First, 1776, the break from England, which he terms semi-feudal. Second, the Civil War. Absolutely crucial, in his view, to break the power of the slaveholding class. He saw that as a kind of semi-feudal obstacle to industrial capitalism.
And the third phase.
Just the long, bloody conquest of the continent itself, necessary for consolidating the nation.
And this violence wasn't unique to the U.S., obviously. He talks about colonization.
Oh, absolutely. He puts the rise of global capitalism in that brutal context. He cites the, horrifying numbers, 10 to 25 million indigenous people in the Americas. Aztecs, Incas.
Devastated by European conquerors after 1492.
Their societies shattered, populations decimated or enslaved, all to extract resources. For Foster, this violence isn't an accident. It's baked into the system's DNA.
So this violent birth sets the stage for its eventual decline.
Exactly. He pinpoints the peak, the zenith of capitalism around 1881.
Why then specifically?
Well, think about it. The U.S. was industrializing like crazy. Germany, after beating France in 1871, was booming industrially. Japan was starting its transformation.
So from the perspective of those benefiting, it looked like clear sailing ahead.
A long and flourishing future, as he puts it. But, he argues, they were blind.
Onto what?
To the contradictions they'd created, the seeds of their own destruction, inherent in the system.
The conflict between, social production and private ownership.
That's the core Marxist idea, yes. And those conflicts, which were maybe just tiny cloudlets earlier, had grown by the early 20th century into dense black storm clouds.
And this isn't just theory for him. He points to a specific moment when the crisis really takes shape.
Right. The eve of World War I. That's when he says the general crisis of capitalism becomes undeniable. It's not just a temporary downturn, it's systemic decline.
And this lines up with Lenin's theory.
Perfectly. Lenin identified this as capitalism moving into its final stage, imperialism, dominated by monopolies, finance, capital. The whole structure changes.
Okay, so if the system entered this general crisis around WWI, what proof did Foster see in 1949? What were the tangible signs that this decay was real and irreversible?
He lays out 5 major manifestations, 5 big symptoms of the sickness.
All right, what's the first one?
The first relates to economic crises, the boom and bust cycles.
But capitalism always had those, didn't it?
Yes, but Foster argues they changed fundamentally. In the earlier, healthier days, a crisis was sort of a purge. It cleared out inefficiencies, and industry often emerged stronger on a higher level.
Like a forest fire clearing underbrush.
Kind of, yeah. But in this period of decline, he says, they become truly fearsome visitations. They don't fix themselves anymore, they just devastate.
And the prime example would be?
1929, of course, the Great Depression. That didn't self-correct. It flattened the entire capitalist world for years.
He puts a number on the cost to the U.S., right?
A staggering number. $300 billion in lost production in the U.S. alone.
Which is hard to even grasp today, let alone in 1949 dollars.
And to give it scale, he points out that $300 billion was roughly the entire material cost of World War II for the United States.
Wow. So the system's internal failure cost as much as fighting the biggest war in history.
That's his point exactly. That kind of waste, that scale of self-inflicted damage, proves the system is fundamentally broken. And his prediction...
Let me guess. It gets worse.
Constantly worse. Deeper, more frequent crises.
Okay, so that's symptom 1. Deeper economic crises. What's number 2?
It flows directly from the first. The intensification of the class struggle.
Makes sense. Economic instability usually fuels conflict between workers and owners.
He says what used to be just, a background tension became a veritable nightmare for the capitalists. You see the rise of huge trade unions.
And communist parties globally.
Right. A clear, inexorably leftward trend among working people, as he saw it. This struggle wasn't just about wages anymore, it threatened the system itself.
But he's critical of the existing labor leadership too, isn't he?
Very critical. He argues this revolutionary energy is surging despite what he calls the treacherous leadership of social democrats and conservative union bosses.
Who he thinks are trying to keep a lid on things, redirect it into reforms.
Exactly, trying to manage the discontent within the system rather than overthrowing it.
Okay. Symptom 3.
The revolt of colonial and semi-colonial peoples. This was a game changer.
How so?
For centuries, colonial populations were just seen as, easy pickings. Cheap labor, raw materials, captive markets, the foundation of European wealth. Maybe a minor headache sometimes, but manageable.
But after World War II, that changed dramatically, especially in Asia.
Massively. These revolts were pulling, as he puts it, a most vital foundation out from underworld capitalism, that foundation being unbridled exploitation.
And he connects this directly to Europe's problems.
Directly. He argues it's a deep reason why Western Europe, Britain, France, the Netherlands couldn't recover properly, even with billions in Marshall Plan aid.
Because their traditional source of imperial wealth was drying up.
It was crumbling, and no amount of American money could truly replace that plunder.
Symptom 4.
Antagonism among the capitalist countries themselves.
The rivalries over markets, resources.
Exactly. Middle East oil is a big one he mentions. These rivalries inevitably lead to war. World War I did deadly damage. World War II, even more disastrous after effects, especially for Europe.
And in 1949, the key rivalry he saw was
between the big 2 remaining capitalist powers, Britain and the U.S.
Even though they were allied against the Soviets.
Yes. Beneath the surface alliance, he insisted they were locked in a bitter economic struggle. Who controls the markets? Who controls the oil? Whose currency dominates? A constant battle.
Okay, that's 4. What's the 5th and final manifestation?
This is the big one. The fundamental antagonism. Capitalism versus socialism.
The dying system versus the rising one, in his view.
Precisely. The capitalist world is sinking, riddled with problems, while the rising tide of socialism grows stronger, becoming, in his words, lusty youth.
And how does capitalism try to deal with this existential threat?
Through force. He argues the capitalists, led by the U.S., are planning a last fatal gamble to try and drown the socialist tide in blood. Essentially a third world war aimed at crushing the USSR, the new socialist-leaning states in Europe, and the revolutionary movements in the colonies.
So these 5 contradictions, the crises, the class struggle, colonial revolt, internal rivalries, and the conflict with socialism, they all add up.
They add up to a system that's fundamentally sick, rotting from the inside out and headed for inevitable collapse. That's the picture he paints.
But then you look at the United States in 1949, and it seems like the complete opposite picture.
It really does. On the surface, America looked incredibly strong.
I mean, a $250 billion national income back then,
Yeah.
holding 2/3 of the capitalist world's industrial production. It looked invincible, surely, immune to this decay.
And Foster tackles that head on. He calls it the illusion of immunity.
So how does he dismantle that illusion? He acknowledges the strengths, right?
Oh, yes. He lists them. Vast territory, amazing resources, good climate, crucially, no real feudal baggage like Europe had.
And the labor shortage actually helped.
Yes. He argues the chronic labor shortage spurred technology, invention, massive industrial growth. He gives credit where it's due. But, he says, these advantages are only partial and temporary. They didn't stop the U.S. from having economic crises. Remember, the 1929 crash started here, and it was the worst one ever.
So if it wasn't these natural advantages that made the U.S. seem so strong after WWII, what was it?
One key factor: geography. Location, location, location.
Meaning it escaped the physical destruction of the war.
Exactly. Not only escaped it, but was able to prosper on the very wars that were undermining world capitalism in general.
Profiting from the destruction of others.
That's the core of his argument. It fed off the misery of its rivals and allies, and this leads him to that really shocking analogy.
The cannibalism one.
Yes, American capitalism is like a sort of monster parasite living on the body of the rest of world capitalism. It is cannibalistically devouring the other capitalist countries.
That is incredibly strong language.
Yeah.
How does he trace this prosperity built on misery, especially when America was sending aid overseas?
He lays out a timeline. He argues the pre-WWI slump was only broken by munitions orders for Europe.
Okay.
Then, the famous prosperity of the 1920s, based almost entirely on exports to rebuild war-torn Europe, selling American goods to fix European damage.
And when that rebuilding boom ended?
Boom, 1929. The economy exploded, he says, because the underlying problems were still there. The 30s were awful, sick, and anemic industries, never less than 10 million unemployed.
Even the New Deal didn't fix it fundamentally.
Not according to Foster. He saw the New Deal pump priming as failing to restore real health, what really revived U.S. industry.
World War II approaching.
Exactly. From 1939 onwards, boundless war orders and then post-war repair orders. He calls the huge corporate profits during the war, $87 billion, simply blood money.
So his central point is that American prosperity isn't organic, it's war-made. It depends on global conflict and destruction.
Fundamentally, yes. And that creates a massive problem in 1949.
Because the war is over. But the industrial capacity built for the war is still there.
Huge capacity. He mentions the U.S. added $25 billion in new plant capacity during the war, more than Germany's entire pre-war industrial output.
So you had this giant industrial machine, massively overdeveloped.
Facing a market crisis. It can produce mountains of stuff, but who's going to buy it? The rest of the capitalist world is broke and disrupted. Markets couldn't absorb the surplus before 1929, he argues, and they're even less able to now.
So if you can't sell the goods through normal trade, how do you keep the factories running? How does Wall Street avoid another massive crash?
By creating an artificial market, a huge permanent war economy. Meaning the government has to spend massive amounts, he estimates $20 to $25 billion a year on weapons, on military buildup, just to feed those blood-hungry industries, as he calls them.
The military-industrial complex, essentially even before Eisenhower named it.
That's precisely the dynamic he's describing. The system needs war, or the preparation for war, to survive.
And this economic need drives foreign policy. Let's look at the Marshall Plan through his eyes. It's usually portrayed as altruistic aid.
He sees it completely differently. A vain hope, he calls it. It won't save European capitalism because it doesn't fix the root problems: loss of colonies, class conflict.
And he saw evidence Europe knew this.
Yes. The fact they were already asking for extensions beyond 1952 showed him it wasn't working long term. In his view, its real purpose was to make Europe dependent, the American dole, cut them off from Soviet Eastern European trade, and subordinate their economies to U.S. finance.
What about Truman's Point 4 program, aimed at industrializing developing nations?
He dismisses that as illusory. The real goal, he argues, isn't development for those nations, but propping up the shaky U.S. economy, securing financial control, and building military allies against the USSR.
And any industrialization allowed would be limited.
Absolutely. The U.S. would only help set up non-competitive industries, utilities, maybe some light manufacturing things that serve Wall Street's empire, make those countries dependent and turn them into military outposts, not genuine industrial rivals.
So the overall picture is this relentless, desperate imperial drive.
Aimed, in his view, at creating an American fascist world empire. But he argues this isn't strength, it's desperation. And it will actually speed up capitalism's collapse and hasten the arrival of socialism. It's a death spasm, not healthy growth.
Okay, so if the capitalist world is in this desperate, decaying state, according to Foster, the alternative is socialism, and he sees it as gaining strength rapidly.
Ascendant, yes. He makes the bold claim that the years right after World War II definitely tipped the global balance of power towards socialism. It had grown into lusty youth, he says.
We should probably clarify what he means by socialism in this context. What are the key differences he's highlighting?
He spells it out pretty clearly. First, the key means of production factories, land, banks, transport are owned by the people collectively, not private capitalists.
Public ownership.
Right. Second, production isn't for profit, it's for social use, meeting society's needs. And the whole economy is run according to a rational plan.
A planned economy.
Yeah.
And the benefits he claims for this system.
Well, because you remove private ownership and the profit motive, you abolish exploitation. That's fundamental. It also guarantees democracy. He argues fascism is impossible, unlike under capitalism. And crucially, it eliminates those devastating economic crises and unemployment.
He also sees socialism as a step towards something else.
Yes, as the preliminary stage to full communism. Under communism, things like the wages system and even the state itself would eventually wither away. He claims this wasn't just theory anymore, but becoming a matter of practical politics in the Soviet Union.
So the USSR is the pioneer.
Model?
The pioneer, yes.
Yeah.
The 1917 revolution happened, he argues, at capitalism's weakest link. And its success, led by Lenin and the Communist Party, became the ultimate proof, the test of life, he calls it, that socialism works, achieving things the capitalist world thought impossible.
What specific examples does he give of these impossible achievements?
He lists several key tests. First, winning the Civil War by 1921. They had no real army, weak industry, but they beat back counter-revolutionaries, including, he makes sure to note, American troops. Test number 2, the economy.
Right. Industry was devastated after the Civil War, but they rebuilt it to pre-war levels by 1927. Then came the first 5-year plan in 1928.
Which was widely mocked in the West.
Totally dismissed as fantasy. But Foster emphasizes they achieved its goals in just over 4 years, building a massive industrial base while the capitalist world was collapsing into the Great Depression. The speed stunned everyone.
And the ultimate test, World War II.
The ultimate test. Western leaders, he reminds us, predicted the Soviets would collapse in weeks against the Nazis.
But the reality was very different.
Very different. He claims the Red Army did at least 90% of the Allied fighting in Europe, ultimately smashing Hitler's war machine.
And he even quotes an American source for that.
He does. General Douglas MacArthur in 1942, calling the Red Army's counteroffensive the greatest military achievement in all history. For Foster, you couldn't get clearer proof of the socialist system's strength and organization.
And if the military victory wasn't enough, there's the post-war recovery, which seems almost unbelievable given the scale of destruction the USSR suffered.
The scale is just mind-boggling. He lists some stats. 31,850 factories destroyed, 70,000 villages gone, 7 million horses killed. Utter devastation of industry and agriculture.
Far worse than any other European ally.
Combined, yes. Yet, despite that, by 1948, Soviet industrial production was already 19% higher than it was before the war in 1940.
While Western Europe, even with billions in Marshall Plan aid,
It was still struggling, floundering, he says. For Foster, this contrast was stark proof of the inherent sickness in capitalism versus the dynamism of a planned socialist economy.
and the Soviet success inspires others.
That's the second mass advance. After the war, you see this anti-capitalist wave across Central and Eastern Europe. Poland, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Romania. He says 100 million people there are building new people's democracies, breaking the power of the old ruling classes, and heading towards socialism.
And globally.
Yeah.
He points to China.
The Chinese Revolution is huge for him. He argues China and other awakening colonial nations won't just become slightly better capitalist states, they'll inevitably move towards socialism. The past, China was taking land reform, anti-monopoly action, eventually socialism that, he claims, is the real future for the formerly colonized world. It confirms the whole Marxist trajectory.
Okay, so we have this picture. Decaying capitalism, rising socialism. Where do the other political players fit in, particularly social democracy?
Foster has very strong views on social democracy. It's a major focus of his critique.
He doesn't see them as allies, then?
Far from it. He argues that the social democracy, which historically had the loyalty of many advanced workers, had degenerated. It had become, in his words, a major support of the capitalist system itself.
So its failure is actually another symptom of capitalism's decay.
Exactly. The system is so weak it can't even sustain a genuine opposition anymore, according to him. He points to specific historical moments as evidence of betrayal. He accuses SD leaders of betraying workers into fighting World War I for capitalist interests. Then, right after the war, when revolutions were breaking out, especially in Germany.
He sided with the establishment.
Worse than that. He blames them for actively suppressing the revolutions, assassinating revolutionary leaders like Rosa Luxemburg and Karl Liebknecht, setting up the bourgeois Weimar Republic, and essentially saving German capitalism when it could have been overthrown.
And he sees this pattern continuing in 1949.
Absolutely. The post-war social democrats in Europe, people like Attlee and Bevin in Britain, he insists they aren't real socialists, they're just defenders of capitalism wearing radical slogans as a disguise.
What's the disguise hiding?
It's hiding the fact that they avoid actual revolution. They focus on reforms, welfare programs, maybe some nationalization. What Foster dismisses as Keynesian illusions.
Illusions because they don't tackle the root cause, private ownership.
Precisely. They're just putting band-aids on a dying system, he argues. And in doing so, they actually prevent the necessary revolutionary change. And crucially, in 1949, they were throwing their weight behind American imperialism, supporting the Marshall Plan.
So, if social democracy is part of the problem, who offers the solution?
The communists, naturally. Foster presents the communist movement as the only authentic force for change, drawing strength from two main areas. First, ideology.
Marxist-Leninist theory.
Yes, which he stresses is scientific, based on profoundest realism. He's very emphatic. Communism is not a religion or dogma, it's a science that analyzes material reality and predicts capitalism's inevitable decay.
And the second source of strength?
Organization and character. He portrays communists as reliable, honest. Their discipline, he claims, isn't forced but voluntary, aimed at making the party effective, a fighting organization, not a talking machine.
And they practice self-criticism.
He highlights that as a dynamic feature. The ability to openly admit mistakes and learn from them keeps the party adaptable and strong.
The sheer numbers must have seemed compelling in 49, too.
Definitely. He cites about 20 million Communist Party members worldwide. And with China's revolution, nearly a third of humanity was living under communist political leadership. Their strategy.
The United Front?
Yes. Linking everyday struggles against poverty, fascism, war preparations to the bigger, ultimate goal of achieving socialism.
How did this translate to specific American issues at the time? Their stance on foreign policy, for instance.
They fundamentally opposed Wall Street's foreign policy. They rejected the Marshall Plan outright.
Not
Because they believed it hurt European workers, weakened national industries, propped up reactionaries, and burdened countries with military spending for America's planned war against the USSR, their alternative.
let the UN handle aid.
Exactly. Neutral UN administration to prevent American domination.
And domestically. What were the key fights for American communists?
Civil liberties were huge, especially fighting for the rights of Black Americans who faced intense persecution. They saw that struggle as inseparable from the fight against fascism and economic exploitation. They positioned themselves as the most inveterate enemies of fascism.
What about the constant accusation that they were just agents of Moscow, the foreign agent charge?
He dismisses that completely as reactionary slander. Communists, he insists, are patriots, but Marxian internationalists. They see workers everywhere having common interests. And far from being anti-American, they argued that cooperation between the U.S. and USSR was essential for world peace, a position directly opposed to Wall Street's perceived war plans.
Foster doesn't just stick to politics and economics, does he? He applies this materialistic critique much more broadly, to culture, society, even religion.
Yes, his analysis goes deep. He sees the decline of religion as accelerating and ties it directly to the decay of capitalism itself.
How does he make that connection?
His basic argument is historical. As human knowledge grows, particularly through science and industry, the need for religion, with its reliance on miracles and faith, diminishes.
Humanity grows out of it.
Sort of. He traces stages, from witchcraft to mythology to Christianity, and now, he says, humanity is working its way out of Christianity. The core beliefs, God, devil, hell, are becoming filmy and indistinct for more and more people. Science undermines the very basis of religious belief.
And he sees symptoms of this decay within religious institutions themselves.
Yes. Things like congregations needing sermons on politics or social issues just to stay interested rather than theology. It suggests the core message isn't compelling anymore.
But if religion is declining naturally, why does he link it so strongly to capitalism?
Because he argues capitalists actively promote religion, even finance it.
Why would they do that?
Because, he claims, they definitely need religion to control the working class, to undermine the class consciousness and resolute fighting spirit.
The opiate of the masses idea.
Exactly. Divert attention from earthly exploitation to heavenly rewards, or just general moral confusion.
He even argues that capitalism corrupts science in relation to religion.
Yes, a pretty stunning claim. He says science itself comes under pressure to find ways to harmonize with religion, to adopt impossible myths and legends, essentially to avoid contradicting the socially useful beliefs that prop up the system. True intellectual freedom is stifled.
He singles out the Catholic Church for particular criticism.
He does. He sees it as a powerful political force, a militant champion of capitalist reaction. He uses examples like Cardinal Mindszenty in Hungary, who opposed the new communist government and was convicted of treason.
And he thinks this political alignment will backfire.
Inevitably. He predicts the church will lose influence, especially among Catholic workers, as they increasingly embrace the struggle for socialism. Its political choices doom it.
So, if religion represents the decaying past, what's the future? Communism aims to create the socialist man.
That's the term, yes. The fully developed human being reaching their maximum potential. And this potential is unlocked, he argues, through 4 fundamental freedoms that socialism provides, which are absent or distorted under capitalism.
What's the first, most basic freedom?
Economic freedom, the absolute foundation. Abolishing exploitation, producing for need, not profit. It means workers aren't just thrown onto the street, idle. He argues you can't have any other real freedom without this basic economic security.
Makes sense. Political rights don't mean much if you're starving. What's second?
Political freedom, which for him means the end of capitalist class rule. When workers and their allies control the state, people achieve their full stature, a new dignity, real participation.
Third.
Intellectual freedom. Science is unleashed. No ruling class distorting findings or censoring research that threatens its interests. Plus, maximum scientific education for everyone, not just an elite.
And fourth.
Cultural freedom. Art and artists are freed from just serving the ruling class, creating propaganda or distraction. Instead, art can serve the people, express collective aspirations.
Beyond these freedoms, he talks about socialism actually improving humanity, physically and mentally.
He does. On the physical side, he points to things like massive Soviet projects to transform the environment, irrigation, to conquer drought, huge forest belts, things capitalism wouldn't do for profit.
Reversing the negative effects of capitalism on people, too, like factory work, war.
Yes, tackling the degeneration caused by exploitation and conflict. But the mental side is perhaps even more striking.
How so?
He argues the very atmosphere of capitalism is fundamentally neurotic and psychotic. Look at the rising rates of crime, addiction, mental illness in capitalist countries, he says.
And socialism cures this.
By removing the root cause. Exploitation, insecurity, competition, the planned economy, job security, collective spirit. This creates a sane, balanced society, fostering individuals who live in friendly solidarity, a complete contrast to the alienated, anxious state of capitalist man.
Okay, so the theory is laid out, the vision is clear. But how did Foster and the American communists actually plan to get there? What was the strategy in 1949?
Well, he's quite careful to state that the preferred path, the official communist line, is one of peaceful advance and social progress.
Peaceful, given the revolutionary rhetoric.
He insists that violence is always started, fomented, and provoked by the capitalists and their agents, not by the communists.
He refers back to Lenin on this point, right?
Yes. He says Lenin preferred a peaceful path in Russia, but the ruling class resorted to violence, so violence was used to defeat them. The response was violent, not the initial aim.
So what was the strategy for places like the U.S. in 1949, where some democratic channels existed?
The strategy developed after 1935 was to work towards electing a broad popular government, an anti-monopoly coalition.
Who would be in this coalition?
Workers, small farmers, Black Americans facing persecution, professionals, intellectuals. Basically, everyone oppressed or squeezed by big monopoly capital. The idea was to win power through existing democratic means, if possible.
A peaceful electoral path to power. But he didn't think it would be that simple, did he?
Not at all. He anticipates the reaction. Even if such a coalition was democratically elected, it would immediately face, in his words, powerful and very surely violent opposition from organized reaction.
Sabotage resistance.
Yeah.
Maybe even armed uprising from the right.
Exactly. And that capitalist violence would then force the elected people's government to go on the offensive.
How?
By taking decisive action, curbing the monopolies, nationalizing the banks, taking over major industries, moving rapidly towards socialism to consolidate its power and break the resistance.
So the real tactical question wasn't if there'd be conflict, but how to manage it.
Precisely. How do you mobilize such overwhelming popular support, such gigantic masses of people behind the democratic government, that the reactionary forces are too isolated, too unpopular to mount effective violence? That's the key challenge he saw.
This leads to his final, urgent predictions specifically about the United States in 1949.
Yes. He delivers a stark warning. The U.S., he says, is living on the thin crust of a live volcano.
Because of the economic situation.
Because of that war-swollen industrial capacity that has no market, he predicts an inevitable economic crisis, far worse than 1929, is coming. The system simply can't sustain itself without that artificial military spending, which itself creates massive contradictions.
And the political consequence of this coming crash.
It will shake the country to its core. This coming cyclone, he believes, will push the American people further and more permanently to the left.
Awakening the working class.
Yes, and transforming the relatively small Communist Party of 1949 into a genuine mass organization capable of leading the country towards socialism.
So the ultimate goal is?
To achieve socialism, but hopefully with the minimum amount of capitalist-instigated violence, and as soon as possible. The crisis will create the opportunity. #tag Ultrabearable.
Wow, when you laid it all out like that, the thing that really hits you about this 1949 analysis is just the sheer, unwavering conviction behind it.
It's absolute. There's no doubt in Foster's mind. The core argument is just crystal clear, isn't it?
Yeah, that the American system wasn't some exception. It wasn't uniquely strong or viable.
No. He saw it as this temporary, almost freakish, parasitic growth, feeding cannibalistically on a global capitalist system that was already dying, and ultimately destined for the exact same collapse once its food source spores, the weaker capitalist nations ran out or fought back.
It's a complete inversion of the usual narrative of American exceptionalism, especially in that post-war moment.
Completely. For him, the world had fundamentally, irrevocably shifted. From that capitalist peak around 1881, the balance had tipped decisively towards the socialist camp after World War II.
And the struggle he saw wasn't just political, it was almost existential.
You could say that. A struggle between a dying system clinging to violence, war, reaction, and a new system that he believed offered a higher form of freedom, security, even sanity.
He ends the analysis we looked at with a really pointed warning, specifically for Americans at the time. It sums up the whole Cold War dynamic from his perspective.
He does. It's quite provocative. He warns the American people not to be fooled by the propaganda saying Russia is too weak to fight.
Propaganda he believed was being pushed by Wall Street.
Precisely to justify that permanent war economy they needed to avoid collapse.
And he says if Wall Street succeeds, if they drag the world into another war based on underestimating the socialist world,
then learning the hard way through the practical experience of a devastating war would be too terribly costly, a catastrophic price to pay for that miscalculation.
So the final question he leaves hanging, really, is for the American people themselves.
Yes. Can they recognize this dynamic? Can they check the war-making expansionism of American imperialism, as he termed it, before that terrible final lesson is taught?
It's a powerful, challenging thought, echoing from 1949. Definitely gives you a different lens through which to view that entire era, and perhaps food for thought about economic drivers and political rhetoric even today. Something to mull over.